The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. This is the Financial Survival Network.
Financial Survival Network is presented to you by Regal Assets. Buy and sell physical gold and silver through your existing retirement plan, 100% tax-free with Regal Assets. If you want to include physical gold or silver in your existing IRA or old 401k, request your free investment kit, which was recently featured in the Forbes and Smart Money Wall Street Journal magazines. Call toll-free 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620, or visit regalassets.com. We have this myth about education in our society that somehow learning can only take place in a classroom, and in fact, it's discouraged from taking place anywhere else but in a classroom. And this is dangerous. It's sending society and the world into a downward spiral. Mike Reid of Mises.org has just written an article entitled Horrible Schools for the Whole World. Mike, welcome to the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com.
Thanks, Gary. It's great to be on.
And it's great to have you. So we're big on education because we believe that education is a lifelong process, that if you stop learning, you become very rigid and you cease to grow. And if you stop growing, I don't know what happens then, but nothing good. What's your take on the state of the educational establishment in this country and the world now?
What I see is that there's an attempt now to make education cover absolutely everything. Or let me be precise, to make government schooling cover absolutely everything. So government schooling is now supposed to teach children how to be moral, how to take responsibility for themselves, how to write a resume, how to get a job. And so it now replaces not only the home, but also what the things we used to do in churches or in extended families.
Right. So years ago, the function of schools was dramatically different than it is today. A lot of what people learned, they learned so-called on-the-job learning. What happened to on-the-job learning today?
Well, on-the-job learning is now called child labor, and we have gigantic campaigns to outlaw it around the world. The idea seems to be that we need to separate children from the reality of the marketplace, that we need children to learn in kind of an antiseptic hospital environment where nothing from outside can come and pollute their pure knowledge.
Right. So they want a monopoly on the thoughts that go into your kid's head, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the educational idealists seem to think that they already know what all children need to know for the next 20 years or 100 years. And parents are increasingly seen as an obstacle, something that needs to be pushed out of the way so that the teachers can come in and replace parenting with government-approved curriculum.
Right. So how do they explain things like the internet where kids do, in fact, educate themselves and they learn about a variety of subjects that aren't on the school's curriculum?
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the most wonderful examples of children's learning potential. For us, humans, all our children are learning machines. Our kids are just built to learn. That's their whole evolutionary design. And our kids don't just learn the things we want to teach them. They learn how to get the things they want. They're curious about the world. So there's a neat experiment that a scholar Sugata Mitra did in India, in the slums, downtown slums in India. And Sugata Mitra and her research team put a computer in a hole in the wall in a dirty alleyway and just let kids experiment with it. And guess what? Kids on the street who don't even know English can learn to use a computer, can learn to send email, use the internet, get Facebook accounts without adults telling them how to do it. Children are learning machines. And if you want them not to learn something, you really have to stop them.
Well, it seems like our learning factories, especially in the inner city, have done a masterful job at that, haven't they?
It's kind of scary to see not just the inner cities, but the way that in North America, but the way that schooling is now expanding all over the world, so that the traditional cultures, the languages, the religions that children used to learn by working with their parents, by interacting with their family members, and God forbid, getting some money by working as a newspaper boy or working on the farm, all that has to be swept away now and replaced with the curriculum approved by the United Nations.
Right, which was the crux of your article. It's expanding a failed model, what has so drastically dumbed down the populace in North America and arguably in large swaths of the developed world, and it wants to expand that to the rest of the world.
Yeah. And to me, this is a little bit frightening because up until now, up until the last 100 or 200 years or so, almost all children in every society learned what they needed to learn quite freely by working with their parents, by asking people questions, and by getting into trouble on their own. And for most of these children, throughout human history, the exam was reality. If you learn to build a house, the exam is, when you build the house, does it stand up when the rain comes? Does it leak? If you learn to hunt animals or to track them, the exam is, can you catch game? Can you feed your family? And on a simpler example, if you learn to make lemonade, did your lemonade business make a profit? That's all you need to have an establishment that figures out whether children are learning or not. And what we've done now is we've replaced all that reality-based education with authority-based education, so that now children need authorities, teachers, principals, boards of education to tell them whether they are successes or failures. And this also means that now children are limited to the learning speed of adults. I said before, children are learning machines. We adults, we've already kind of slowed down. We've learned the most important things we're going to learn in our lives. This is why you were talking about the arrival of the internet. The internet is still dominated by people who are children when it was arriving. So the young people who grow up inside the world of the internet, they know it much more intimately than us old farts who grew up before the dang thing existed, because those children's minds are fully adapted to that new environment. But when we take over education, when we forbid children from learning on their own, when we monopolize children's time, it means that kids are slowed down. They have to learn schooling from us. They have to learn computers from people who know computers less than they do.
Right, and I've seen that for myself. Like, I taught my children how to use computers at 3 before the internet got big. Right. And at this point, they can outthink me in many skills. Not all, but many. And, you see this over and over again where the kids, look, homeschooling kids outlearn their peers in schools way, way more than we would ever like to admit, especially the unions. And how is that when they have no formal curriculum often? They have no set schedule, no disciplined approach, and yet they learn this stuff and they win spelling bees and geography bees and everything. They're way, way ahead. Yeah.
And also, in many places, private schools are way better than public schools. There's a great new research in the last decade or so by James Tooley, who's a Cato scholar. And James Tooley's been traveling all over the world for years looking at private schools for the world's poorest kids. I mean, kids in slums in Nigeria, in Hyderabad, India. And James Tooley discovers that there are government schools in these places, free government schools that the parents could send their children to. But the parents are choosing to pay money, that is scarce money they could be using for food, for clothing, or for shelter. They're paying it in order to send their children to private schools. And the kids in the private schools, surprise, surprise, even though there's less money going into it, even though there's no government supervision to make sure they do it right, the kids in the private schools are learning more. He says, James Tooley suggests there's about a 15 percentage point difference, for instance, on mathematics and history and literature in terms of the kids learning when you do the grades.
Yeah, well, there's nothing new about private schools outperforming public schools. We've seen that for my entire lifetime in the U.S. Even though I went to highly regarded public schools, there was very little very few courses in Latin and foreign languages, for instance. My sister was a French teacher, and she taught in an exclusive private school in Chicago, and she taught these children starting in first grade, and then she had worked in a public school in what was then called junior high, and she taught children French at that age. She said that the younger kids learned much faster, much better than the older kids. So how can we possibly succeed in these private schools when their whole approach is flawed?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, it looks like a lot of the great schools in these poorest countries are effectively black market schools because they have to pay bribes to the government inspectors in order to stay open. Because, of course, they don't have the ability to fill all the government inspection boxes, like having a giant playground in the middle of downtown Hyderabad in India.
Yeah, well, you know what that's like. When you go to hotels around the world, you learn the flaws which can work to your advantage of various star ratings, because a 4-star hotel is one almost exclusively has to have 24-hour-a-day room service. So it could be a fairly crummy hotel that's been redone recently, but as long as it has a restaurant and it's open, it's going to get 4 stars, whereas a 3.5-star that's magnificent and clean, sparkling, but it doesn't have a restaurant and room service 24/7, it gets 3.5, even though it's the better hotel.
Yeah. And this is the problem with trying to make standards that apply across the world. This is the problem with trying to make a standard in New York at the United Nations agencies that's going to work for every hotel or for every school on the planet. The local people who've actually been to the hotel or have sent their kids to the school, they know best whether it fits their needs. But when we try to make them conform to some outside perspective, we distort whatever they're up to.
Which leads me to our next question, because you basically nailed it, that governmental control is just a prescription for failure, especially in education. So hypothetically, you're in charge of New York City's school system. Nanny Bloomberg has appointed you. He said, you can do, Mike, anything you want here. You can close them down. You can fire the whole bloody lot of the unionists. Whatever you need to do to make them succeed, do. Where do you start?
Oh, man. Well, our first job is we have to repeal 2 important sets of laws, and those are child labor laws and minimum wage laws, because some children are going to learn best by working a job. Now, admittedly, some kids are going to do great in school. They're going to enjoy learning from authorities, but some kids are going to learn best painting or mowing lawns or, God forbid, just getting into trouble. So I think we need to repeal laws around minimum wage, laws around child labor to free up children so that they can engage in the market, get a hand in that at an early age if they like. And then furthermore, of course, we have to get rid of compulsory attendance laws. Then maybe we'll just let the teachers accept whatever money parents are willing to give them for the parents who are still willing to send their children after children are no longer being forced to go to school.
Yeah, well, I just find that the factory model of education, it's so stifling because, you know, they've now figured out that children process information differently. There's the so-called normal kids, and then there's the ADHD kids, of which I probably was one of them. And normal kids are linear thinkers. You show them A, then we go to B, then C, and then D, and they learn it, and they get 100 on the test. Nonlinear thinkers can't learn that way. They have a whole different process, and rather than giving them drugs and therapy, maybe they need to have a whole different experience in education that really is more suited to the way they process things.
Yeah, absolutely. I am an ADHD kid who was protected from that label because my parents fought the teachers on it. So I think children can learn in a wondrous variety of ways, but when you pack 30 or 35 kids into one classroom and you make them take all the same subjects together and you make them listen to the same teacher for everything, well, of course, some kids are going to cotton to that quickly and some kids are going to find that it doesn't suit them. And you're right, the current model is just to force the round pegs into the square holes by drugging the kids.
Yeah, there's something very wrong with it. And the interesting thing is a kid can do badly in elementary school, in his primary education, and then go off to college and become a star. All right, they haven't been able to explain that one. And obviously there's something else taking place. I mean, myself, and I don't want to become the poster boy for this because honestly, 45, 50 years ago when I was in school, things were definitely different. But nothing ever interested me in school. I found it all kind of boring, and I picked it up by osmosis somehow, a lot of it. But then I got out into college, and I found courses that I was interested in, like astronomy, like sales and marketing, like management. And then I decided law school was for me. And at that point, I excelled more than my parents could ever believe. I almost made law review, but I graduated with honors from law school. Not that it was, and it wasn't even that hard. Somehow we've got it through our heads, Mike, that learning difficult material, learning complicated, complex formulas and such needs to be difficult. And yet, when true learning takes place, learning is joyful. And learning is natural, and there's no barriers to it.
That's right. We're born to learn. I mean, that's what makes us different from the rest of the animals. We are born to learn everything we can get our greedy little hands on. But human learning has to be directed by our interests. That's why kids are bored. Teachers are doing things that the kids know aren't relevant. And so the children are bored by it, and instead the kids learn, well, how to pass notes behind the teacher's back. I have a friend who learned to text with his phone behind his head, looking like he was resting his head on his hands, because that was what was fun to do in class.
Sounds like a marketable skill to me. It's great. But hey, one other thing, like Richard F. Miniter, conservative author, wrote an article recently about the Kindle, that it will obsolete public education because every book ever written will be available at the child's disposal, and with some mentoring and tutoring, he thinks that that the concept of the brick and mortar school is going to go the way of well, you name it. But yeah, I think he has an interesting point there.
Yeah, not just schools, but not just elementary schools or public schools, but libraries, universities, bookstores. Everything's transformed now by the revolution in publishing. I make a lot of ebooks over at invisibleorder.com, where we make ebooks for libertarian and free market publications. And it's changing the world of the way people share ideas. It's changing the world of publishing. And so if people want to get on the train, if people want their ideas to spread now, they need to do it in a format that works with Kindle or with Apple's iBookstore. So I think you're right. We're going to see a huge change in the way that schools and all other ways we share information work, because kids can now get all that info from all the books on the world on a tiny little tablet in their hand.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And it's about time that creative destruction came to public education.
You're absolutely right.
Well, Mike, hey, thanks so much for coming on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Go there. You can hear this interview as well as many others, and we aggregate hundreds of articles a week on what's really going on in the world. And speaking of books, my new book called Forget Wall Street, Go for the Gold is coming out shortly in Kindle format as well as in hard copy. So anyway, thanks so much. And we want to learn more about what you're doing, Mike. Where's the best place to connect with you?
The best place to connect with me is at my new website, socialbulldozer.com. And that's where I do my work on schooling and all other aspects of the enormous government control of human lives that is now bulldozing our societies. trying to replace them with one giant UN-approved parking lot.
Yeah, well, goodness knows we can use a little bit of creative destruction as far as the government's concerned as well.
That's right. So I hope to see you at socialbulldozer.com. And Kerry, I've really appreciated being on the show today.
Hey, well, we appreciate having you, and we'll talk to you again soon.